there still isn't a widely available to-go coffee cup that can be recycled. I would say that the EU graduate who solves that problem is going to make a fortune. Those bags of beans that you see in Starbucks stores all over the world are actually how the company began. I feel really happy. The impact on myself and on the rest of the world from Starbucks is a very positive one.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us again to the series Learning from Leaders. We are extremely excited today to welcome Zev Siegl, the co-founder of Starbucks and startup mentor. And the entire session will be facilitated, as always, by Peter Van Am, writer and author of Before I Was a CEO. Peter, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Luc, and it's good to be back with you for our next installment of the Learning from Leaders. And I think we're all super excited to be welcoming with us the founder of a legendary company, Starbucks, that is Zev Siegl. Zev is joining us from the place, I think, we'll hear it in a minute, where it all started for that most famous coffee company, which is Seattle in Washington State on the West Coast of the United States. We'll be hearing from him in just a minute about how things are there. Before we start, I want to take the opportunity to do a quick shout out, if I may, Luc, to Zev Siegl, who is actually the EU alumni who put us in touch with Zev. She's been mentored by him and was so kind to put us in touch. That's the power of the network. Thank you, Jesse, for doing that. And now, over to the man that we've all been waiting to hear from. Zev, how are you? It's early in the morning there. Have you had your first coffee yet?
I'm having my first coffee right now.
That is absolutely excellent. Couldn't do any better for a startup entrepreneur who's been active in coffee many years in your life. But let me ask you, Zev, and I hope the coffee is good, and I'm sure it is in Seattle, but how are you otherwise? How is the situation in Seattle right now? Isn't there a crisis going on there too with COVID-19?
Yes, we have three crises here in Seattle. And number one is COVID. We are now at stage 2 here. For example, when I go out, I wear a mask, but we can go out. And number 2, we have a practically global protest going on in reaction to excessive force used by police against people of color. And Seattle is one of the cities in the world where there's a tremendous amount of activity. Silent marches. There's an encampment, which is located 2 blocks from where I'm sitting.
Wow.
And then the third crisis going on is that we have a president who is not being a leader right now, and it's very difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of challenges that you have to deal with, both individually, of course, when it comes to the public health crisis, and as a country and as a nation. You know, maybe quickly before we do our turn back into time, you know, when you mentioned the Black Lives Matter protests, and of course they are about police brutality, but also about the discrimination of people of color in the workspace and in every other part of society. I know, of course, that you already left Starbucks long before that was an issue, but I remember a few years ago, Starbucks was one of those companies who was criticized for not having enough diversity and possible opportunities in the workspace, and on the other hand, got then some kudos because it reacted very heavily, and I think they closed all the stores worldwide to give a training on how to fight racism and discrimination.
That was an amazing experience for me. I was not part of Starbucks during that time. That happened quite recently, long after I had left the company. But there was an incident in Philadelphia in which a manager thought that 2 African-American men were loitering in the store. It turned out they were just waiting for someone.
For a coffee or for a friend.
But she didn't know that, and she was, was in a part of Philadelphia that's very upscale, and she was nervous. And so she asked them to leave, and that turned into quite an incident, and a media incident. And Starbucks, for a large corporation, did the most amazing thing. You described it. They closed all the stores in the United States. Imagine, that's 7,000 stores.
Wow.
Imagine giving up the income for an entire day in order to work on the problem. And so on that day, I went to 3 Starbucks. There were 3 of them located within 2 blocks of where I'm sitting. And that's, you can say that in many places in the world.
I think it's true.
But I went to see, and I looked in the door. The sign on the door said, "We are closed for a day of education about race and bigotry." And inside, sitting around a table in each of the locations that I went to, was what appeared to be all of the employees, 15, 20 people, and they had notes in front of them, and they were having what looked like a pretty deep conversation. I was amazed. As you said, for that, the management of Starbucks got a lot of praise for reacting that way.
Do you think now, because it's been, of course, a couple of years ago, do you think that led to change at Starbucks? And is there indeed, sort of a hopeful future ahead then if you address these
Starbucks, under the leadership of the longtime chairman, a 35-year chairman, Howard Schultz, has always taken positions that other corporations didn't. Liberal positions, especially having to do with human rights in many countries, not just the United States. And
progressive, inclusive.
Progressive, inclusive. Even helping veterans get jobs. They had a special initiative for returning veterans from the armed services and giving them training and enrolling them as employees. That's pretty great stuff. And it's just a company that has that reputation. But although it comes from the heart, certainly from the heart of Howard Schultz, I mean, he really believes in liberal causes, it is also unbelievably good marketing. So,
right.
I mean, this is corporate social responsibility of a high order.
And that's, of course, one of the concerns that we see again now, of course, with a lot of companies that indeed have reacted very strongly, at least publicly, to say that they're anti-racist and that they're going to do something about discrimination. But then indeed, the question rises again, is that indeed just a marketing play, or is it real, and will it lead to structural changes? Are you hopeful?
Oh, yes. This is one of those wonderful moments in which doing the right thing is actually good for business. So
right.
I expect a lot of corporations to make changes.
It's something that, of course, is in your DNA. And now I'm going to make a segue into the past, because we're now in 2020, but it must be, half a century ago, almost, at least a couple of decades, that you started the company. We want to know all about it, of course, and what you've done since. But your story, you're in Seattle, but your story doesn't really start there, does it? You're actually born in the Midwest, I believe, in Detroit, Michigan, and then had a couple of early childhood years in New York as well.
My parents were both born in Detroit, Michigan, and their 3 children, including me, I am the middle child, were also born in Detroit, Michigan. However, my parents' parents, who are my grandparents, were all born in Eastern Europe, and they were immigrants. So my parents are 2nd generation, I'm 3rd generation. My father was a concert violinist of a very high professional order, and after in the late 1940s, he decided that he should be based in New York City, which at that time was a center of classical music, one of the world centers.
Right.
And we moved in 1947 to New York, to a suburb of New York City.
Including you. So
everybody went. Then 10 years later, the same thing happened again. He was offered an incredibly good position in Seattle, Washington, and the family moved again. Frankly, all of us are really happy that he was offered that position in Seattle, because it changed our lives in a wonderful way.
Yeah.
My mother was an educator. Started as a teacher, and eventually in Seattle, the land of opportunity, she was able to open a school that still exists. It's a school for children age 3 to 11.
The early childhood education, very important years, of course, and something that I think you also have in your, not just your DNA, but it's also one of your passions, education, isn't it?
I started out as a teacher, and before that I worked in camps for children when I was in high school and first years in college. I've always been interested in other people, children included. And that's why we're talking, you and I, Peter, because of my interest in entrepreneurs.
I'll get my inner child out for the conversation.
Yeah, I find entrepreneurs fascinating. So.
Yeah. So you have that sort of background of parents who were, on the one hand in music and culture, on the other hand in education, very strong influences, both, of course, your parents, and then you also had a couple of other people you mentioned to me that were very influential in your life, an uncle and an aunt, and then a couple that worked in the marketing industry in Madison Avenue in New York.
These people were very important to me. Like everybody who's listening to this conversation, I had people in my life who, at the time, I wasn't aware that they were mentoring me, but they were. And I have their pictures in my home, and I honor them in my thoughts almost every day. One of them was my mother's brother, who was a businessman, and he and his wife, my aunt, took an interest in me, and he took me to work. He had a meat distribution company, and he would take me to his office several times a year. This is a privilege because, I would sit in the corner and play with his notepads and the pens he would give to customers, and I would listen. While I'm playing and waiting for lunchtime, I'm listening to what's going on. And if he had to go out into the distribution warehouse, I would go with him. And I would see his interaction with people. These are fantastic opportunities for children.
They say you learn with your eyes, or you steal with your eyes.
But the interesting thing is that, of course, the children don't know that they're being exposed. They find out later when they go to EU University and they're in a business class and they say, oh yeah, I remember my father used to do that when I visited him at his office. It ties together later in life. And my parents also had friends, this was while we were still in New York City, who were very much involved in the late 1950s Madison Avenue world. They were both in advertising.
Yeah, we know from the series Mad Men, that's sort of
yes, the two martini lunch crowd. And they also took an interest in me. And I realized later how much I learned from them about, well, not only about how they interacted with each other, a married couple, but also about how businesses function, because they would always talk about their clients.
And of course, if we look back now at your career, then sort of indeed those influences sort of merge, because after college, of course, you worked a few years as a teacher, but then you were sort of a restless person. You describe yourself as a startup guy, and you started having lunch with these friends, two other friends, about, we should do something, we should do something else, start up our own business. And that's sort of, that's what you did.
Yeah, Gordon Bowker and Jerry Baldwin and I were friends. We started meeting kind of formally, to see if we could come up with a way to improve our lives that would give us more from life than our first jobs that we each had after graduating college. And we were just wanted something more interesting, and we would meet every few weeks, talk in between. And finally, in August of 1970, we were having lunch together at a little French restaurant. And at the end of the meal, the waiter came back to the table and said, "Would you gentlemen like to have espresso after your meal?"
Excellent idea.
And we said yes, and he left. But that was the first time that anyone had offered us an espresso in Seattle.
Right. Because
the world of coffee that we take for granted today did not exist. You couldn't buy good coffee in Seattle, and nobody had an espresso machine. So he came back to the table with the 3 espressos, and we're kind of interested in them. And we each picked up our little cup and took a sip, and it was terrible. It was like drinking something that you would pour into the tank of your motorcycle, to make it perform.
Not a good first experience for an espresso then.
It was really bad. And so the conversation changed from the ideas that we had been talking about, which were not going to work anyway, to, okay, what about coffee? This coffee that we're having here is really terrible. Does Seattle have to live with bad coffee? And that was the idea. That was the spark for
That's where it
Starbucks.
all started. Yes. And then, of course, unlike the other times that you had ideas, you actually turned this one into a business.
Well, but just like the other ideas, we researched them. We researched each of our ideas, and then very quickly with most of the ideas, we would discover, oh no, bad idea, can't do that one. Or maybe it's a good idea for somebody else. We don't know enough to do that. And we started researching coffee, and we never found out why it would be a bad idea. It was a good idea.
Actually, it turned out to be a good idea. You mentioned the research, and you talked a little bit about the division of roles. Between the 3 of you, you were actually the one who really got into that research and said, let me find out what good coffee places are actually around that we can maybe learn from.
Yes, I did the kind of research people did in the summer of 1970. It was primitive. It was more like doing research in the 19th century.
Books, libraries.
Library. You go to the library and do your research, looking at old newspapers and old telephone books and trying to figure out, are there coffee companies that are any good? And I know it's hard to imagine, especially for your students, but you couldn't Google anything because there was no internet.
Right.
I eventually, during the research, I was doing the phone book research, actually, when I was just looking for coffee companies that maybe were at the gourmet end of the spectrum. I found one in San Francisco. It's called Pete's Coffee. It still exists.
I know it. I've had Pete's Coffee.
Yeah. And there was a phone number. So I called Pete's Coffee and asked to speak to Mr. Pete. I had discovered there was a Mr. Pete. And by some great stroke of luck, they found him and he talked to me on the telephone. I said, oh, Mr. Pete, it's so nice to talk to you. I'm one of 3 friends. We're thinking of starting a gourmet coffee company here in Seattle. And before I could finish the sentence, he said, Zev, before you go any further, I think you should come down to San Francisco and look at what's here. I'll show you my stores and I'll take you to my roasting plant. And then you can decide whether you want to be in the coffee business.
That's incredible. I mean, like that's a competitor.
Potential competitor. And, I think that the students at EU and your alumni would understand what a great moment that was. That somebody, I did the right thing. I was assertive and called a person who I thought would be an expert. But he did the right thing too. He took an interest in, a young man, I was 26 years old, who clearly knew nothing. And so I got in my car and went to San Francisco. And, it's a long drive. It's a 12-hour drive at that time. And he received me, and I looked at his store, which was full of customers and had a wonderful aroma. It was a retail coffee bean store with a small coffee bar. And then he took me to his roasting plant, and we sat there and talked. It was a small little roasting plant, the kind of thing that would occupy not much space. And then he did something, the second thing that changed my life. So he's invited me to come and have a look, and he's taken time to talk to me. Now he says, why don't we go out for a glass of wine and a little light dinner before you leave?
Best idea ever.
Oh my God. It was so important to me. So we had a wonderful time. Berkeley has a very nice climate, sort of like Barcelona. And we were outside sipping wine, and he discovered that my father was a professional violinist, which he really liked because he was a great fan of classical music. And at the end of the conversation, that was over an hour, a very nice, pleasant time. Remember, I'm 26, he's probably 46. He says, he turned to me and he said, You know, Zev, if you and your two friends go ahead with this, I'm perfectly willing to be a coach. I'll give you some time.
That's incredible.
This is from heaven. This is, you know, this is what people hope for.
And that's what happened. I mean, he followed through.
This is what I hope would happen to every entrepreneur, that an entrepreneur would say that.
Right. And he actually followed through. I mean, like you followed, it's almost like an internship, you could say, at his coffee.
Yes, he had us each come down one at a time and work in his store for a week or 10 days. And then he was available to us by phone. And he actually came to Seattle twice to visit us.
Fair to say that there would not have been a Starbucks without Pete's?
I think there would have been a Starbucks, but it would not have had the quality standards and the discipline that Mr. Pete instilled in us. He was old school. You have to do it right. You have to go for the top quality. You have to exceed people's expectations.
Right. Really excellent. And so that, you know, that gave you had the idea. Now you had the tools. You were going to be able to bring a good product to market. You know, next step, find a name. Where did the name Starbucks come from?
Oh, this is something. This is a great story. We did what your students would do if they were starting a company. We made lists of names.
Right.
And I remember just this tablet full of name after name after name. And finally, our attorney said, "Hey, you guys," that's probably exactly what he said. "You have to choose a name now because we have to submit the legal papers."
Right.
Enough fooling around. So we quickly narrowed the list to 3 or 4 names. And one of the names was Starbo, Starbo, and another was Steamers, evoking the era of steamships. And somebody blurted out, "Starbo, Steamers, how about Starbucks?"
Wow.
And that was it. And everybody said, "Oh yeah, Starbucks, that's a great name." It was just very impulsive at that time.
Done.
Now the logo was different. The famous mermaid logo. I have an old Starbucks cup here with the original logo.
Nice.
And the mermaid is still part of the Starbucks green logo that you see today. And she was a stroke of genius by our outside marketing consultant, a man named Terry Heckler. And it was really insightful. His firm came up with the logo and the original logo and the mermaid, and he also redid the logo to be the green logo for the company when it evolved later.
Yeah. And so he came up just, you know, with, of course, what has become an iconic logo. What was, somebody's asking, what was actually the meaning behind the word Starbucks? Nothing, just a play of words.
Gordon Bowker, one of the 3 founders, was trying to create in his marketing thinking, was trying to create a company that people would think had been in existence forever, that it was maybe a very old company. And we didn't tell people. We were a new company and everybody knew that, but he wanted the imagery to be old. So we all thought that the name contributed to that. There were some historical allusions to that word, Starbucks. We didn't invent the word.
Right. And it was certainly a sort of your startup, of course, but really in the physical sense of the word. You know, when the next step came, it was time to go and almost literally build your first store.
Oh, yes. You know, Starbucks founders were like many entrepreneurs today, people in the tech fields, for instance. You know, you're working for a big corporation, you have a great idea for some piece of software that the world needs, and you start out to do it. Well, you know, you do what's called sweat equity. You compose the code at night and on weekends when you're not working at your day job. And well, that's what we did. We were undercapitalized. The 3 founders of Starbucks contributed $9,000 US dollars in 1970 to start the company. It's very little money. But what we did contribute is a lot of sweat equity. We built the first store by hand ourselves. All the fixtures. We painted everything. We did lots of additional work. We did everything that we could because we couldn't afford to pay anybody else to do it.
No, but you must have been a handyman.
That was only the first store. Well, we were definitely amateurs. And that's how we were able to do it. Then in the second year, as we started to expand, we realized that we needed money. By the way, the reason we realized that we needed money from outside was because we ran out of money. And but the first store had been quite a success, and some local guys who my partner Jerry Baldwin knew said, "Okay, we'll help you." And we sold them 15 or 20% of the stock. And they were the only investors that the founders allowed into the company.
Wow.
For the next
What
decade,
a great investment.
on their part, yes.
Yeah.
And for the next decade, we were able to grow by reinvesting profits. The coffee business is a profitable business. And also by borrowing against assets like our coffee inventory. So we used retained earnings and debt to grow the company into the 1980s.
But so
now,
this is
that was possible because we did not try to grow outside of Seattle.
right. And so, initially, you build a company. It's actually successful from the start, isn't it? I mean, like you have a good product, you have a nice look and feel to it, and you get a great training from a great mentor. And people like good coffee. Who knew, right? Even in Seattle. And so you're able to expand quickly.
Well, it's wonderful when the products that you're competing against, which is commercial coffee from supermarkets and in restaurants, it was so terrible then that it was easy to convert customers if they would come and visit us. So when they came in the door, the first thing they got was this wonderful aroma. The whole store just had a fabulous aroma to it. And as they came toward the counter, we would give them a sample of whatever coffee we were brewing, like a Harar from Ethiopia.
Sure.
And they these little tiny cups. We didn't sell coffee then, brewed coffee. We only gave it away as sample.
It was a different type
they
of
would take
store.
a sip, and they would take a sip of this really high quality coffee and say, "What's this? This doesn't taste like the coffee that I've been drinking." And then we would use that as an opening to explain to them that there was a difference.
That's great. I've always wondered if it was like a sort of a side business in addition to the Starbucks brand that they have. You have next to the counter, you always have like you can buy some beans, but actually that was the original Starbucks. You were a coffee
those
roaster and
bags
you
of
sold
beans.
coffee.
Those bags of beans that you see in Starbucks stores all over the world are actually how the company began. That's correct, Peter.
Yeah. And so you grew it over the next decade or so from one store that you hand built yourself to 6 stores and I think 2 coffee roasting plants in the Seattle area.
Yeah, we had a small roasting plant, which we then closed and opened a really state-of-the-art roasting plant, which carried us into the 1980s. And we also had 300 wholesale accounts. And this is a very interesting thing. There was a symbiotic relationship between our retail B2C business and our B2B sales to restaurants. People would go to a restaurant, they'd have a great cup of coffee. It would say on the menu, coffee by Starbucks. And then they would say, "Oh, Starbucks, I've heard of them. There's a store near me. I think I'll go there and get some coffee."
Right.
And the two worked really well together.
So
but
you
we
were
were only in Seattle. This was not even a regional company. It was in one city.
In one city. Now it seems like you're onto something. You're growing quite well in the first decade. You're actually a vice president. You're the first employee of the company. You do a lot of different roles. You're in charge of employee management. You sort of you're the glue that keeps everything together. Why would anyone ever want to leave a company like that?
Well, I was the first to leave. My partner stayed 3 years longer than I did. I'm a startup guy, and I mean, I know who I am. I'm an early stage entrepreneur. I have been all my life. And I also like to help people who are just like that. People like you mentioned, Jesse Ackerman's. She's starting a company. I'm working with her on that. The moment came when my partners said to me, "Zev, we have this fantastic coffee roasting business. We have wholesale sales. We have retail sales. We think we can grow it further. And you keep opening new divisions of the company, a tea division, a supermarket division, this division, that division. And that's very nice. But those divisions are not as profitable as their core business. So we want you to stop doing that. And I thought about it and said, oh, I don't think I can stop. I need, that's just me. That's my DNA. I'm an entrepreneur. And they agreed to buy me out. So I sold my stock. I was very happy about that. I suddenly had a lot of money. I went on and immediately opened another company which sold equipment to coffee companies.
Yeah.
And I continued to do that for 20 years after that.
And of course, you've proven to be a real serial startup entrepreneur, as they say. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on. But it's quite remarkable because just about a year or so after you left the company, there was a new guy that appeared, a new kid on the block. That was
the new kid on the block. That's Howard Schultz. That's very, very nice description of him. So Howard Schultz became aware of Starbucks because Starbucks was a customer of the company that he was vice president of. It was a company called Hammerplast, which sold very attractive plastic tableware, including coffee thermoses and brewing equipment all over the world, including to Starbucks. So he, as vice president of sales, it must have been about 1982, he made a Western tour, California, Oregon, and Washington to see his customers. And he was curious about Starbucks because we were selling a lot of thermoses to people for brewing coffee. And that was the first visit. And that led to Howard and his wife moving to Seattle, and he became vice president for sales and marketing of Starbucks Coffee Company. Everybody in the world would say that he was a very good hire.
Right, I'm sure.
He was exceptional, a really great communicator, a good salesman, but also a good marketer. And several things happened during the next 2 years. Starbucks began to experiment just a little bit with espresso, selling coffee beverages in our stores. At the same time, Howard Schultz was sent to Italy to go to a big trade show in Milan. There are still big trade shows in Milan, or there will be after COVID. And
the famous Italy trip.
And yes, the famous Italy trip. He's written about it extensively. And he experienced what everybody experiences when they go to Italy. There's espresso on every corner.
And it's great.
He got off the airplane and there's espresso right in the airport. And so when he came back, he explained to the partners that he felt that we should pursue coffee with a lot of energy, but brewed coffee, espresso-based drinks. And Starbucks experiments with coffee expanded, and eventually Howard Schultz came to the founders with the help of some angel investors that he knew in Seattle, not venture capital at that time, angel investors, and asked if he could purchase the company from the founders, and from the surviving founders. That would be Gordon Bowker and Jerry Baldwin. And unbeknownst to Mr. Schultz, they were ready to sell. A negotiation began, and eventually Mr. Schultz and his group of angels acquired the company, and they immediately began to turn it into the company that we know today.
And so that begs into question, if yourself and your co-founders left before the global success really took off, at that point, it doesn't sound all too dissimilar from the story of the McDonald's brothers who had Ray Kroc come in.
But unlike the McDonald brothers, we weren't sorry.
Right, because that's
McDonald brothers are famous for feeling that they had been taken advantage of.
And you could, of course, if you purely look at the financials, you could say, well, I could have been a multi-billionaire, and of course I had a nice life. Why is it that you were saying, I have no regrets?
Oh, I have no regrets at all, and I don't think my partners do either. I'm a startup guy. I am not a person who's very comfortable in a company with 100 employees, let alone thousands. And I'm good at the early stage, putting things together, financing, and I'm not good in a large organization. So I'm completely content with leaving an organization. I've done this more than once, at a time when my comfort zone has been reached, the limits of my comfort.
So
And
it's not always all about the money. I mean, like, you can be happy, content, you say.
Oh, absolutely. If you know who you are, and I do know who I am, you can be content if you're following your own life plan. Now, how do I feel about the Starbucks of today? 32,000 stores, 78 countries. It's amazing to me. And it's all still very high quality, which is really impressive. I feel really happy. It's like seeing your child turn into one of the greatest people on earth. The impact on myself and on the rest of the world from Starbucks is a very positive one.
Right.
And I'm thrilled that a man like Howard Schultz was present and wanted to do this.
Just as, of course, you had the good fortune of meeting somebody like Alfred Pete and being able to learn from him, it's sort of like you pass that on, and you say, sometimes you don't only have to think about money, you don't only have to think about competitors and beating them. Sometimes satisfaction can lie in learning from each other and being happy for each other's successes.
I'm in complete agreement with that thought. I certainly am a happy guy. Not only do I get to talk to you and to share my story with the community around EU University, but I also work with a considerable number of young entrepreneurs, and I get to hear their stories. They're my teachers.
Yeah.
I learn every day from people that I mentor, and they're in many countries now.
And we're going to hear from a couple of them now that you mention it in just a minute. We've learned already a lot from you, but one of the questions that we had to ask you, of course, being such a specialist in coffee, is what is the best coffee that Zev Siegl, the founder of Starbucks, has ever had?
Well, there's so much great coffee now. Every year, more interesting ways of brewing and the quality of the agricultural end of the coffee business. I like to think of coffee as an experience. It's the quality of the coffee plus everything that goes with it. Where, for instance, if you're in a coffee bar, what's it like? What's the barista like? And to me, the best experience that I've ever had was in a really unusual place. I had a speaking engagement in Johannesburg. And while I was there, I went to Cape Town, which is a marvelous destination to go to. If it wasn't so far away, more people would go to it. And while I was there, I stayed 2 nights in what's called a black township. These are segregated areas where only black people live. And they are attached to every city in Johannesburg still, in spite of the fact that apartheid has ended. So I was visiting this township, being shown around. It's fascinating. And we went to this particular township was called Khayelitsha. And we went to the center of the township where there is a supermarket and a big pharmacy and also a train station for a commuter train. And at the train station, which is outdoors, not an enclosed area, there was a coffee company called the Department of Coffee. The name is a joke because there's a department of everything. There's a department of everything in South Africa. So this is the Department of Coffee. It's a tiny little takeout espresso bar. And the owner refers to himself as the Minister of Coffee. Another hilarious joke.
Excellent.
And his name is Wagama Galeni. And he's a young Black African who lives in Khayelitsha. And he's a classic entrepreneur story. He had been helped by a development bank. He had attended classes in a program for first-time entrepreneurs. I mean, he's this perfect guy. And he was trying to get Black Africans at this train station to get interested in espresso-based drinks. And it was very difficult. He survived, but it was very difficult at first. And I tell you, standing outside of his place, I have photographs from it, standing outside of his little coffee bar with Wagama, the minister of coffee, talking about the coffee business. It was one of the high points of my life. I mean, it was so completely radical and amazing to me.
And of course, very different experience to Starbucks. We're going to turn to questions now from students, Zev, if that's okay. And before we do, just one question from a student online. What was the original Starbucks and where is it? Are you close to it now?
The original Starbucks is about a kilometer from where I'm sitting. It's in the Pike Place Market. It still exists. Instead of being a coffee bean store, it is now a coffee bar. It is also a major tourist destination, particularly for Starbucks fans from Asia, Japan, Korea, China, who wait in line outside of the store for a chance to take a selfie of themselves. And if you, the people who are listening to this afterwards, you can just Google Starbucks original location or Starbucks first store, and you will find 1 million photographs, all selfies of people from all over the world. It's a fascinating place.
And by the way, even though it has 37,000 stores all over the world, there's still a lot of places where there's no Starbucks, and a lot of people are also asking how they can open a Starbucks store.
Well, it's very interesting. Starbucks doesn't franchise, so you can't open a Starbucks store. You can open an independent coffee bar. That's a possibility.
Right.
Lots of people compete with Starbucks in every city on the planet.
Often with the same logo or similar logos and styles.
Actually, if you want to get a phone call really quickly, copy Starbucks logo. They have people that watch the internet all the time. They're very jealous. Yeah, it is possible to compete with Starbucks. The way Starbucks grew internationally was through joint ventures. There's a joint venture in Europe. There's one in Eastern Europe. There's one in the Gulf region. There's one in Japan, et cetera. Starbucks forms a joint venture corporation with a local company that understands food and beverage retail. That's how they do it. So they take advantage of local expertise. For instance, in India, where some of your people are listening right now, their joint venture partner is Tata, which itself is a giant corporation.
That's right. So that's the way to do it. Well, we'll see if it's possible for some of our students to be one day partner with Starbucks. I want to turn to Mia. Mia, who's from Turkmenistan, but right now in Frankfurt in Germany. And Mia, you had a question about the environmental impact of Starbucks and entrepreneurs in general.
Yeah, hello, everyone. At first, I want to say it's a great honor to participate in this event. So my question is, so Starbucks focuses on environmental sustainability, like they selling reusable cups and also shifting to their recycled packaging. So which trends in the environmental sustainability you can highlight?
Now, remember, Mia, I am not part of Starbucks today, but I am an observer of the coffee industry, and I'm quite up to date. The coffee bar industry, which is how the coffee industry has evolved, has become mostly a to-go beverage kind of industry. It has a tremendous problem with environmental compliance. It is a tragedy that there still isn't a widely available to-go coffee cup that can be recycled.
Yeah.
The reason is, the cold drink cups, the clear plastic cups, in many parts of the world, those can be recycled, not a problem. Mm-hmm. And they are. The hot coffee cups, the ones that look like paper, are actually lined with a coating so that the paper can survive the hot drink. Those cups are not recyclable. And there are billions of them sold every year. This is something that the coffee industry is trying to solve, but so far there is no solution. And I would say that the EU graduate who solves that problem is going to make a fortune. So it's not so great. Now, there are other types of packaging that Starbucks uses that is recyclable. And starting about 15 years ago, Starbucks started using recycled products, especially recycled lumber from old buildings, as part of the interiors of their stores. And as part of their contribution to not doing damage to the environment. But the coffee industry has a problem.
Yeah.
Now at the agricultural level, Starbucks and other companies, Starbucks is not alone, are doing wonderful work with farmers that has reduced, or in many cases eliminated, the use of commercial fertilizers. So at that end, I think the coffee industry has done good work. But the coffee cups, it's time for someone to invent one.
Right, it's a great startup idea. And that perhaps already answers to a certain degree the next question from Tushar Kanti, who's in India. Tushar, go ahead.
Firstly, I would like to thank you, Mr. Siegl, for sharing your inspiring experiences with all of us. So my question for you is, if you were a graduate today, just like most of us who are watching you today, in what product line or services would you have launched your startup in?
Well, for any new company, there has to be demand. It doesn't work very well to have an idea that has no market. You can starve trying to make that happen. So I would say that one of the most important things is to understand the customer's point of view. And I'm not thinking just of consumer products, but also a business-to-business product, like, say, software. It's important to understand where, one expression that I love is where their pain is. What are they suffering from? I have a man that I help occasionally who has a company that provides software to microlenders in the United States. Microlenders are not just in other countries. We also have them here. And he supplies 1/3 of the microlenders in the United States with the software that they use to make loans. And the reason he was able to get so much of the market, 1 out of every 3 customers, was because he realized that the pressure point for them was that they had to go back to their office to get on their computers to finish up the loan documents. So his company was the first company to put all of the program online. So now you have microlenders, out in the field talking to a farmer. They've got their portable computer on the hood of the car, and they're making the loan right there. His competitors still can't do that. And so there's an example. He understood the pressure point, the pain, and he took care of it by creating a system that would work in the Ethernet. Another thing that he does, and I'm just using him as an example, is he exceeds customer expectations. So he has these hundreds and hundreds of microlenders signed up, and they're using his software online. And then the COVID virus hit. In the United States, the government made money available to small businesses. Some of these businesses were the customers of the microlenders. They qualified to get these microloans to help them get through, to retain their employees and help them get through the crisis. So the use of his system skyrocketed. It just went nuts. And he brought in extra people and was helping by phone and by text and email to make sure that the system was working for them. And I think as a result of that, this is exceeding expectations. So in a crisis for them, for his customers, he exceeded their expectations. Now, I would think that that's going to result in him soon having 40% of the market instead of just 30%, because word is going to get out around the world of micro lenders that this guy and his company is the one that's going to be there for you when things are tough. So those
Right.
are some ways that startups and actually existing companies can connect with their customers.
Excellent. Yeah, it's also a question, of course. Thank you, Tusha, for that question. And it's also a question that's relevant, particularly today, Zev. Of course, you are living in an exceptional time. And so, Carolina, I think you have a question. Carolina, who's from Portugal, but right now in Dublin, Ireland. I think you have a question about what it means to be an entrepreneur today and the impact of the coronavirus. Go ahead.
Yes, it's correct. I actually wanted to capture what Mr. Zev started the topic with COVID. As an innovator and you're a business visionary, what would you say it's essential for business to adapt to this post-pandemic period?
Well, this is a difficult time for business, which is why you're asking the question, Carolina. It's really, the game has changed. So there are a number of things that are still possible now. Most businesses that have to do with a product that's sold online or is a software product or a phone application are going ahead. That includes, by the way, the EU graduate that we were talking about before, Jessie Ackermans. Her company's proceeding to get financed, we hope, because it's an online platform driven by a phone app. Just a minute, Robin. The other aspect is assets are going to be available at an extremely low cost. So it's going to be possible to acquire existing businesses of all types, distributorships, retail, all kinds of companies, and grow them after the virus has been managed with a vaccine. It's going to be possible to enter a business at a low cost by acquiring assets. Now, I recognize that means that somebody else has had to give up their assets at a price far lower than they had expected, but it's a reality. Also, I would advise anyone to, especially for a startup, to think in terms of a niche, a narrow area that's been overlooked. There are, every day people start companies like this. Oh, let's go back to the example of the man who's providing software to microlenders. I mean, who would think that would be a business, providing software to microlenders? But it is a business. It's a nice business for him, and it's also becoming a valuable business. So when he wants to sell, when he's in his early 60s, when he wants to sell, it's going to be an asset that will make his retirement absolutely terrific. So these are some aspects of of what is a very unpleasant time for business owners. Niches, buying assets at low cost, and repositioning the companies.
That's very good advice. And, to build a little bit on that, I think a couple of questions also, Zev, from people in the chat. People asking, for example, Lena, she's asking, if you were still at Starbucks today, what would you be doing different?
Well, if I were still at Starbucks today, I would be starting new divisions because that's what I do. But trying to step back into the zone that Lena is asking the question about, what do I think Starbucks could do today? There are a couple of things. I have been mystified why Starbucks has no presence at all in the world of chocolate. They have a fabulous brand identity. They would know how to develop a line of chocolate products that would be fabulous, or they could acquire a company, but they don't do it. I'm fascinated by that. Why? In terms of other areas, for instance, beverages, they have a development lab. It's here in Seattle, where they're constantly developing new products that many of which sell quite well when they're brought out. Variations on herb teas that have beautiful color and they're served iced and attract a lot of attention. And they're still able to develop new coffee products, which really amazes me, because you would think after 400 years of coffee that we would be done with new products, but coffee companies continue to develop them.
Chocolate, of course, a great example, and indeed sounds like it's very complementary, at least in terms of its product, with coffee. Other people are asking, like Toshiro, asking more about the soft skills that you need as an entrepreneur. What do you think is the most important soft skill that you need to succeed?
Well, I think there are two, Toshiro. Number one, an open mind. If you find that you're having conversations with people about your business idea and the other person does all the listening, that's probably not a good sign. The entrepreneur needs to have a certain level of assertiveness and good ideas, but they also have to have the ability to listen. Fortunately, my partners and I had that particular skill, and we listened to a lot of people. We didn't accept everything that they said, but we certainly welcomed their ideas. The other thing is an openness to financial forecasting. This is really significant, and it's something that I have learned over many, many years. I don't think we would be having this conversation if Jerry Baldwin hadn't been one of my partners. And why is that? Well, he's a nice guy, smart, and fun to be with, but Jerry also developed very quickly into a first-rate financial executive. Even in our second year and from then on, we knew what our financial position was, and we knew what it was probably going to be 30 days from now. Well, I think that in my experience with hundreds of startup entrepreneurs, many of them have no idea what their financial position is. So what if you are just what people sometimes say to me is, Zev, I have a great idea and I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm just not a numbers guy. I just don't like doing the numbers. Well, that's not the greatest sin in the world. You can survive, but you have to then say in the next sentence, I'm not a numbers person, but I have this consultant or a partner who is the numbers person. And that person is the one I'm going to listen to.
Right.
It is not okay to begin a company and take money from your family and then later from angel investors and not have a deep understanding of how financial spreadsheets work.
It's you point to a number of important points. This is really just a core skill that you need. I saw some interesting reaction from Ricardo, who put out two sort of conundrums or two things to choose from. If you had to choose, if you're a startup entrepreneur, would you choose for money? Would you choose for vision?
Well, Ricardo, my experience is that there are three reasons why people start companies. There are more than that, but there are three main reasons. The two you mentioned, the feeling that you could do well for yourself financially, and another is a vision. But I would call that an insight into an industry. But there's another thing, which is self-actualization. A lot of people who want to start a company want to have the experience of creating something. And, they're not a fine artist and they're, not a musician, so they create a business. And that self-actualization is, I think, the desire for self-actualization, I think, is a pretty important factor. Another one is if you're working for a large organization, is the opportunity to be your own boss. But that comes with a caveat, which is being your own boss doesn't mean being a dictator to the people who are around you. It means listening to them and thinking about their needs. You're your partners, your staff, your customers. So being the boss, numero uno, does not mean that you are a dictator.
Right. So you clearly need to have some empathy as well. A second conundrum that Ricardo wanted to put forth, I think it's also an interesting one. If you look at your partners, the people that you co-found a company with, what's more important? Competency, you mentioned that, or trust, the fact that you can trust them.
So Ricardo, you have hit on a very sensitive and interesting point. We were friends. And as we started to have our conversations when we were 26 years old, I think what we learned about each other is that we were kind of well-adjusted people. None of us had any degree of craziness about us, and we got along very well with each other. And I think that our ability to cooperate and to listen to each other was really important. And the other aspect, and this is, my theory is you create your own luck. I think we were a little bit lucky because, as it turned out, I was a very good startup person. I could handle a lot of tension and do a lot of things at the same time. Gordon Bowker was a deep thinker about how to position a company in a marketplace, and he did that for other companies too. And then Jerry Baldwin evolved into an excellent leader and a fabulous financial executive. So we had a lot of important areas covered from early on. And Starbucks, looked pretty good to our customers, both wholesale and retail, because of that.
Right.
The combination of talent was enormous.
So you have the right partners, or you discovered over time what were your top skills and how you could best work together. Somebody's also asking, Roman, if you also had failures also in those early years at Starbucks, and perhaps in the interest of learning from you, could you share one of those stories?
Roman, what a great question. I think everybody's going to benefit from you asking that question. Yes, within Starbucks, we did have some failures. I can describe 3 of them to you. We wanted to sell coffee in supermarkets, just like you see in many parts of the world today. A coffee grinder, bins of coffee, or bags of coffee. But we wanted really high quality, which was not available. So we started a sub-brand. It was called Blue Anchor Coffee. And we got 2 important supermarket chains, grocery chains, to let us install these departments. They were quite attractive. And customers started buying the coffee, but an unforeseen problem happened. A smarter, more experienced entrepreneur would have seen this coming, but we didn't see it coming. The buyers for the supermarket chains, the executives, as soon as we got set up, started pressuring us to lower our prices. From their point of view, they had let us in to their stores, and they knew that we had invested in that. And now they thought, well, now we can get these guys to lower their prices, because that's what supermarket chains do. They go after their vendors to get them to do that. But we couldn't lower our prices. We were operating very efficiently, but our coffee was really expensive. We paid a high price for the green coffee that we then roasted for the grocery stores. So within 18 months, we had to sell our supermarket division, the Blue Anchor Coffee, to another company that had just begun opening supermarket departments, but they weren't as quality conscious as we were. So we sold them all of our locations and our equipment and got out of that business because we just could not play the price game with supermarkets. We should have known that. That was a mistake. Number 2, we thought in our forecast, all entrepreneurs do financial forecasts, and I certainly encourage that. And we refined our forecast and improved them, and we forecasted that about 15 to 20% of our sales would be in the fine leaf teas, from all over the world that we were offering. Offering in our own packaging, by the way. So 15 to 20% of our sales forecast as tea. The actual number, 2.5%.
Wow.
It never reached 3%. We had tea, in excess in our warehouse because we had purchased as though a significant portion of our sales were going to be tea. I don't think we could have known that was going to happen, but it did, and it was a mistake. And we had to gradually sell off our tea inventory.
Starbucks could have known it later, because I think Teavana was an venture that they set up so many years later and made it seemed like the same mistake.
They acquired Teavana to get into the tea business, but a lot of people think that it wasn't a very successful acquisition compared to some of their others. And then the third mistake that we made, this is a gray area. It's not so clear. I mentioned that Starbucks started experimenting with coffee bars in 1981 it began, and then when Howard Schultz became part of the company, the experiments expanded, and it went pretty well. Now, for sure, we could not have opened a coffee bar in our first store in March of 1971 when we first opened the store in the Pike Place Market in Seattle. But I have been asking myself, could we have opened coffee bars, say, in 1978 or 1976? And I think the answer is we probably could have. But we didn't. We actually had conversations about this, and we decided not to because we were selling to the first coffee carts and coffee bars that were opening in Seattle at that time. They were our customers.
Right.
And we decided that for now, this is the late 1970s, we'll be a wholesaler to those guys and we'll watch them grow. Looking back and seeing what happened by 1990, say, in the coffee bar industry, they were spreading all over the world, maybe we could have done that earlier. So those are three areas where our vision wasn't so accurate.
Right. So
thank you, Ricardo, for asking that question.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely an excellent question. I'm looking at the clock, and I'm afraid, we already ran out of time a long time ago. People keep on asking questions. We are going to wrap up. Of course, I do want to give one final word to you, a thing that we also started with in the beginning. Somebody's asking, you see all the social divisions right now in the US and other places. You seem like a very sensible person, very aware of other people. What do you think is something we can do to solve those divisions?
It's going to be difficult to move from the relationships among various peoples that we have now to a more ideal world because of many factors. But clearly, equal opportunity in education and in employment is where we've got to go. Not to the degree that we have it now, but more. And it's going to be painful for people of privilege, people like me and you, Peter. We have advantages that many other people don't have due to their economic situation or their race. And we're just going to have to persuade those in power to give more opportunity to people who are lacking the power to get what they need.
Yep. I think that's very sensible. And by the way, that was a question from Isabel Molina, who's in Houston, Texas. Zev, thank you so much for all the wisdom that you've shared with us, the time that you've given us, the advice that you've given us. I recall a lot of things. I think many people will be talking about this and thinking about this conversation for many days and weeks and months and years to come. Thank you so much for your time and your wise words.
You are welcome. It was an honor to be asked, and I try my best to help organizations that are helping entrepreneurs.
We couldn't be more fortunate than to have you. And I want to now, perhaps for a final word, turn, of course, to Luc Kraan, the Managing Director of the school. Thank you again, Zev.
Yes, thank you very much, Zev, for joining us and sharing your vision and inspiring our students. Final shout out as well to Jessie, who has been listening to us. She's on the chat. Thank you very much for the connection, for connecting Zev to EU Business School. It's highly appreciated. I think the students really enjoyed the talk. They learned a lot. So Zev, if you want to come back one time, you're more than welcome. Might it be virtual, might it be on one of our campuses. We'll always welcome you with open arms. Thank you to the audience for joining us. Next session already from the Learning from Leaders series is next week, June 30th, with Julien Tornare, the CEO of Zenith Watches, a luxury brand, Swiss watch, one of the protégés of Jean-Claude Biver, who was part of the Learning from Leaders series already. Have a safe evening. Have a nice day for you, Zev, back in Seattle, and see you next time. Thank you very much.
Good luck.